Good Saturday morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. And if you will, like, share, comment on the post. Appreciate it very much. And then we will be in the 8th chapter of the book of Acts, following the execution of Stephen and his stoning. We read in verse 1, "And Saul approved of his execution. There arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea, Samaria, except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison." So we have our first real introduction to martyrdom and to persecution of the New Testament church. The Bible has already told us in verse 58 of chapter 7 that Saul was standing at the stoning of Stephen and held the garments, the coats of those who were throwing the stones, and agreed with his execution. And this Stephen's murder sets off a chain of persecution of the early church. And the disciples, the followers of Jesus Christ, began to scatter. It says, except for the apostles, and it says they are scattered through Judea and Samaria. And so, again, even though the Jewish leaders may have been looking at this and saying, man, we're squashing them out. We're doing something. They were actually making their situation worse, because as these followers scattered and went out into the other areas, they ended up fulfilling the very great commission that Jesus had gave them, that they would go in, they would be witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and into the uttermost parts of the world. And so this persecution was the manner God used to send the church out to spread the gospel and to bring in new believers. And great lesson there for you and I today, one that is unpleasant, one that we may not even want to talk about. But many times when we face difficulty and even persecution in our life, we have hardships, then we need to remember, just like in this situation, that God is still on the throne. That God is still in control, and that He can use even that opportunity, that situation we find ourselves in, to glorify God, to accomplish what He designed and planned from the beginning, and to spread the gospel and to have others come to know Christ. And so this is an important lesson in that verse. And then we read how some good men, some other believers, came and buried Stephen and took him off and buried him. And they were very sad, and they had great lamentation. And while all this was going on, we see now that Saul has kicked in and began to ravage the church, began to attack the church and come against the church. And that word ravage there means to injure severely, is what that word means. And so he was coming after them full force. And we know from the beginning of chapter 9 that he was coming after them with the blessings of the political and religious leaders of the time. And Saul's sole purpose was he wanted to strike out and stomp out, rid the world of Christianity. Again, we don't like that, but Saul was just being a good Jew. And we know that as he meets Christ, he becomes just as persistent in carrying the gospel. And so those three verses, there's some good lessons there, but the main one, again, that God can take even our bad times, our hard times, and accomplish His purpose for His glory. Remember that today. No matter what you face, God can be glorified even in your hard times.